Hi, this is Jody Beck from Jody's Gems Quilting. Today I'm going to share why I bought an Accuquilt and how I use it, which is different from most people. I do a lot of scrappy quilts. People give me bags of scraps, and I used to cut them all, press them all first, of course, then cut them all into squares, rectangles, whatever I needed, and strips, whatever came out of it. And so what I'm going to do is show you what I've done with that. Recently, a couple of years ago, our guild was challenged to go through our scraps, clean them up, get them used up, and make charity quilts. So I came up with a whole bunch of different ideas. I didn't have time to go through all my scrap quilt books, so I created my own. And I'm going to show you some of those. You can go to my website and see my patterns at jodysgemsquilting.com. That's 2 J's and 2 S's. These are a sample of some of my patterns. If you're cutting strips, which my mom loves the Accuquilt for that because they cut borders for quilts. She does a lot of Quilts of Valor. And at 80 years old, 80 plus, that's what my family and I decided to get her for Christmas one year. As I was investigating, I was like, oh my gosh, I think I need one of these. And so I'm really excited that we both got one. But if you're doing strips, you can use them for the log cabin cross. They do have a die for rag quilts, which the Recycled Memories is. It comes in 14 different sizes, I believe. And I do have a circle cutter that I bought last year to do some applique, which is pretty rare for me. The quilt's still waiting to be finished. But you could use the circles for yo-yos. There's yo-yos on this Buggy Wheels quilt pattern. You can also, these are with squares, the Crazy 4 patches and Crazy 9 patches, which have been very, very popular. And then I came up with Scrappy Squares 1, 2, 3, and 4, and soon to be 5. And I just did all the math for you. So whether you take charm packs and you cut them into squares, or you have scraps that you're literally using, this will help you with that. So let's get started. Over the years, actually I love this. This is 2 kitchen cabinets that came from a reuse it or recycle place. And I love it. And then this is a kitchen table. And it didn't have legs. I said, I don't care about the legs. And so I created a sewing cutting table for myself. I also elevated it on pieces of leftover flooring. And then I can slide my mats in and out underneath it. The humidity has them stuck today. So underneath, I love it because I can put all of my squares after they're cut. So I cut, put my squares in here. They're all organized by size. And at one time, all my squares fit in here. Since then, these bigger ones, everything from 6, 6.5, actually 5, 5.5, 6, 6.5, 7, 7.5, 8, 8.5, 9, 9.5, 10, 10.5, all the way up to 12.5 inches. I put the bigger ones in here, and then I took all the smaller ones and put them into decorator boxes and set them on a shelf. So I love that. I also found this rack at a thrift store, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. So I organized all of my strips, and these are just leftovers. I have a quilt that's waiting to be written, a design that I'm excited about, and it uses all these strips. This side, it's full of nothing right now, basically just junk, but it was triangles, strips, small strips. They were all by size. So I had 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, and so on, 1.5 inch, and then the triangles. So that kind of helps organize it. You always want a pillowcase or a small bag that you can put this is literally too small to use for anything. So scraps go in here, and then I stitch it up and use it for dog beds and cat beds for the shelter. This is also my little bucket that I have on top that's just full of schnibbles that I don't use either. And I actually pass them on to a friend of mine, Brita, who does crumb quilts first. And then after she's done, then they go to the dog beds. But anyway, if you're doing any strips, I did watch some videos. There's some great YouTube videos out there. And so this is what I had done with it after I watched the videos. If you're doing strips, you can also use this to cut squares. And I do 2.5 inch strips for binding, maybe for an inner border, just a variety of things. And so what I discovered was it makes a lot of sense to go ahead and draw more lines on here. So these are lines just for registration so that when you cut your strip, you have it straight going one way. If you want to cut it into squares, and you take those strips and you would line them up on a registration line and zigzag it back and forth, just like this. That's 2 layers. 3 layers times 2 is 6, so I have 6 pieces of fabric. Then I can do another one here. I can do another one here. I could do another one here. I left a space, I guess they're 2.5 inches apart, and you just line them all up, lay them in there, and then you can send it through, and you have a ton of 2.5 inch squares if you're making a quilt that needs that. You could do the same with a 3.5. And basically, when you get your pieces lined up, you just set this on top. Actually, you know what? That's not true. These are not 2.5, because this is not a 2.5 inch strip. I was going to cut it down to that. This is actually a 3 inch strip. So when I set these up going this way, I put 3 inches between my registration lines, and all I did was draw it with a pen. You'll see these here are also down beyond, and that's because sometimes you'll have a longer strip. So when you line it up on here, there you go. You want to make sure that your pieces, if it stopped here and you didn't have these registration lines down here, it would be hard to see where the strip is. Make sure it's all in between. Then you just lay this on top and you run it through the machine. I also discovered that the mats do wear out fairly quickly. I have a girlfriend who does not quilt. She does not sew, but she does like to press fabric, and she was looking for something to do. And so I gave her my Accuquilt, sent her home with all my scraps, and she cut and cut and cut and cut and cut, and wore out my mats in no time. So I got this long one because if you have a really heavy duty scissors, you can actually cut that down to any size, and it does save you a little bit of money. Now this, let me show you. Somebody told me it's a dryer rack, like in your dryer. So if you have a dryer rack you don't use, get it out and use it for strips. Let me take you over to the rest of the story. Sometimes when you'll get scraps, if you're done with a project, you just throw them in a wad. That's what most people do, and let me tell you, it is so much work. I spent one whole winter pressing my scraps. And I have girlfriends at Guild that give them to me, and so now I give them containers, I give them boxes, I give them things that they can organize them, take them home. I give it to them empty and they bring them back to me full, so they can put strips in here, they can stack up squares, this one is a bag of schnivels, and so that'll probably just go into the dog beds. She gave me this bag, and this is odds and ends, but the nice part is that they're pretty flat. I don't have to do a lot to get them ready to go. These would be flat. These, I think, I might have actually bought these. Sometimes you can get these at a Guild, like Trash to Treasure, where the squares are all cut, but they're pressed, so they're nicely ready to go. This is another stack that just needs to be measured. And so I organize everything so that I can quickly use it. If I'm doing applique, if I'm doing testing a new pattern, you buy a pattern and you're like, oh my gosh, do I like this? I don't know. Am I going to like this? I don't know. So this helps a lot. Then this is my stack. Janelia Macbeth came and did a lecture for us, and she talks a lot about scrap quilting. And so she suggests getting a bowl. Well, I got a big bowl. She wants you to get a bowl that you fill with 20 minutes worth of cutting so that you can cut those scraps and you keep on top of it. I do have a bowl. It's a pretty bowl. It's clear with some design so I can see what's in there. It used to sit on my cutting table, and that way I could just quickly, when I had a few minutes, I could just cut and keep up with it. Now the other thing is that I've got here, besides a mess that needs to be pressed, this is what I do. When I'm done with a quilt and I'm cutting off the backing, these are all backings I just cut off the other day. And so if you keep them somewhat clean and neat, then you don't have to do a lot of pressing. And so when you make your stack, just keep them really organized, and then they're ready to go. I only use the Accuquilt to cut up to 6.5 inches. Everything above that, I cut myself. So just a tip for you. And I also, as you can see, made my ironing pad. This is actually an MDF board. It's a 2 foot by 4 foot MDF board from Home Depot or Lowe's. And you cover it with 1 or 2 layers of batting. of Warm and Natural, and then I just cover it with a piece of fabric and duct tape it on. And recently I just recovered this. So you just cover it just like you would a mat. The only reason I have an extra piece on here is because it's white. I have a cat and she likes to sit on there. And so sometimes cats can get things dirty. This way I can take that top off and wash it. So let me show you how I actually do this. I have a box, a decorator box, and most of my dies fit in here. They're all organized by size. I put my extra mats in here so they slip in the back. And any instructions, directions, all the goodies that come with it fit in there too. The only one that doesn't fit in there are these square ones, the bigger ones, and the 6.5 inch die, and then the long 2.5 inch strip cutter. The rest of them fit in there. So what I do is I take my scraps and literally, I did the same thing on here. You'll see I mark the corners so that I know exactly beyond. So what I do is I take scraps just like this, and I set them on there. So I'll have all of these dies laid out on a table. And when I lay them out on a table by size, I just start taking my scraps and I lay them out exactly where they go. Now, if I had a bigger piece and I was cutting 2-inch squares, that's fine. These were actually cut for 3 inches, and when I went to sew them together last night, I see that the selvage is here. Remember, my girlfriend cuts them for me, and she doesn't really pay attention to selvages. And also the accuracy isn't always there, so you have to adjust for that. So make sure that you're covering your whole piece. So there's 6 here, 6 here. I've got 6 in here, I believe, and then I've got a couple more I have to put in. I think there was only 5 on there. So you just set them there, and you'll see that you can see all 4 corners. Then what you do is you take, ooh, where did I put that mat I just had? Take your mat, set it in here, and I always do it wrong the first time, go the wrong way, and I crank it through. I know the electric ones are really nice, but that was just way too much to invest in for a scraps, because that's all I use it for. Then you take these off and you can see that everything's there. If they don't cut, just have a pair of snips handy. Because we've used these so much, sometimes the fabrics get buried down in there. This goes into that scrap bag that you saw, that container. And the other thing that will help to have around is a pair of tweezers that you can come in here and clean those out. And just clean your snips out, your little schnivels. If you slide the mat off, these come off easier. I'm going to try and do that. Okay. So now these are ready to go into my pile and to make quilts. And so this would be used, this is what I did for the Scrappy Squares 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now this one, there's 3 of them on here. But you can see this is a leftover, so I'm just going to cut it off, set that on there, run it through. After you get the first one, you'll see, you'll know which direction. I just don't use it as often. My girlfriend uses it more. And so you will see that you have cut your pieces. They're ready for your size that you want. So I hope that this helps you with how I use it for scraps all the way up. I do recommend, here's another one. I can run that one through. The girls with embroidery machines and do a lot of applique. This is wonderful, but I did not buy this for years because I don't have time to applique. Don't have time to applique. As you can see, when you slide it off, it's much easier. And your dies will wear out. So that 2.5 inch one, I probably need to buy a new one. And so it is, there we go. So they are ready to go into a quilt. And I love doing it. you will see that I also have a square usually handy so that I can kind of measure my scraps as I go. The other thing I do is I typically lay all of my, I think I said that, typically lay all my dies out, and then I just take scraps and I start laying them onto wherever I want them. If you're making a quilt, that changes everything. And I am really excited because I'm back to doing English paper piecing again. And I went to Houston 2 weeks ago for the International Quilt Festival. And one of the things that I looked at the Accuquilt booth was this die. And I was like, well, that's great, but I only, I do the 1-inch size, but I don't have any. I do papers. I do papers inside. I know there's oh my gosh. I saw so many different options of what to do with the, how to do English paper piecing. It was fascinating, but I don't do 1.5-inch sides. And I don't do, not yet, 2.5-inch sides. But what I discovered was, after I got home, that this would work because, ooh, am I going to find this? I'm working on a project right now. Sorry, this is wiggly. It's actually wrapped around my neck, my camera. But I'm excited because I do 3/4 of an inch around. And so this would be a perfect size. I had to use a ruler to do mine, but this would work for the 2-inch or 2.5. This will work for the another size that I do. It would work for the 1-inch also instead of 1.5, and it just brings in more fabric. I don't care because sometimes these shift, and I like having that extra on there because I'm not perfect. So anyway, but that's how I do it. And this is for a new pattern, so you can be watching for that one of these days. So I'm excited to get this, and I decided that I could use it for my own sizes. But they come packaged like that, so they have directions, they show you what to do, and keep track. You might want to make a list on your phone of the dies that you have, because when you see them, it shows and they're on sale and you want to buy one, you can't remember what you've got. So keep a list of that. And also, I love this, I bought this by mistake. I have 2 of them, and I was going to, return it somewhere or sell it or something. I went, wait a minute. These do wear out, so keep that in mind. You don't want to get rid of them. They will help you. You'll use it eventually. So I hope this helps you to create many beautiful quilts, and just have a blessed day. Take care. Bye.